name is Priscilla Graham. I am an author, historian, photographer, and what I do is research African American history 150 years after slavery to see what's still in those communities. A lot of those communities have been lost, but the footprint is still there. It doesn't matter if you take away the building or if you take away what you think the hide information. It's written down somewhere. It is well documented somewhere. So I go back and look at those communities and see what's there. Well, let's take a look at this. On June 19th, 1865, when General Granger announced that African Americans, well, they weren't African Americans, they were slaves, that they were free and they became freedmen, everything changed. That was the greatest social movement probably in the world, or in our history, in our life. And they were encouraged to stay on the plantations where they were, but there were a lot of people that decided to leave. If you watched the news and saw what was happening in Charlotte, Virginia yesterday, you would see that now. Imagine that 1,000 times of what they were facing back in 1865. But they left anyway. They got on the road and left anyway. And during that time, some people had the means to go using horse and buggy or whatever they had, but many people walked. They arrived in Houston on June 30th, 1865. So they was walking for a long time. Those feet were tired and bloody. They were put up in many places in Houston, overcrowded buildings, warehouses, and different places like that. And they were coming looking for work, looking for siblings, kids that had been sold off in slavery. And they settled in settlements along the way, and those settlements was necessary. And within those settlements, they understood that education was essential for survival. The church was the center of the community, and oftentimes schools were within those churches, and they were in their own communities, so they had control of the type of education and the type of people that came in those communities, and education was essential. But the freedmen had such progress and did so much within less than 50 years of being free that guess what? We don't want y'all to have your own schools anymore. What we're going to do now is integrate you into our system. You're going to become part of HISD. And we're going to start dictating your curriculum and what you teach your kids. We're going to remain segregated, but we're going to dictate what you're teaching those kids. And everything that was in those schools were substandards, but you still had those teachers that was committed to the race, that understood that education was key. Well, somewhere along the way, we failed when when they said, oh, now you can join us and we're integrated and you can go to school with us. Our kids stopped being educated. Most time, people that didn't look like us was educating us. Do you really think that they were concerned about you being educated? I don't think so. So there's your master plan. Decide that who gets education, who does not get education. So that's where the breakdown starts. Is with integration, when we all come together and we start spreading, and that we're no longer a solid unit and concerned about the race. We start becoming individuals and concerned about ourselves. Because you have to realize that these people were skilled people. They were smart people. The barrier that was really the breakup between it was the language barrier. Just like we're talking about our brown brothers and sisters now, a language barrier helps them from elevating and moving forward in some cases. So this is the same thing back then. It was a language barrier. You have to be able to assimilate to a certain point, but you can't lose your culture and who you are. That's when we talk about the brick streets in Freedmanstown. That's because part of those freedmen's culture is embedded in those streets. That's why they're so important, and it's coded. They did what they could do during the time. And as I told you before, when we start integrating, we stop working together for the betterment of the race. And that's what the problem is. And people don't understand about humanity and social justice. Have you ever been in a situation where you've seen a 4-year-old child that's in preschool and you look into their eyes and you see an old man that has lived a much harder life than I had in all my years of being 40 or plus years old at that time. So we have to understand the struggle that these kids, just because they come to school, they have to go home. So you have to understand what they're going home to. And sometimes what they're going home to is the monster that lives in the bedroom next door. And we don't understand that. So we have to figure out that in order to help those kids to get past that, because you have to turn that light on, which is that survival skill for them to learn how to survive, to get out that situation, to get old enough to take care of themselves. And if you don't do that, you've lost the battle. Like I told you before, I researched African American settlements 150 years after slavery to see what's still there, the footprint. To date, I've recorded 18 settlements within and around the Houston area, 102 100-year-old plus African American churches, and 74 historical sites. Now, one of the things is that a lot of communities that we call that was black or freedmen colonies, they mostly turned brown. So it's been a transition in that. Most of those communities are brown now. They're no longer, African Americans have branched out into other communities, the larger communities, and we've sold our land. At one time, African Americans owned over 55 million acres of land. Now we're only down to 7 million. And so that's a lot of land that we've lost. Well, pretty much ignorance. Let's just call it what it is. Ignorance and not understanding the legacy of what we have, looking for something better that's greener on the other side, not knowing you was already in the promised land.